Hello, everyone. It's Mr. Nobody. Welcome to another episode of Making Nobody Happy. Now, I'm going to do something that I don't always like to do, but that is on my mind a lot. I am going to talk a little bit about politics. So just try to bear with me, try to have an open mind, try to save your reactions and thoughts until we get to the end. So, what I want to talk about is doing something, this idea of doing something. So, one thing that often gets forgotten in the rush to take action and the moral pressure to do something is the historical reality of how much of what we think of as the terrible crimes of the past were committed out of a similar desire to take action and do the right thing. Very seldom that people have done things on a large scale out of just mere brutality or conniving evil, especially for actions that required a decent amount of planning and effort and social and institutional coordination. The real explanation is often closer to it seemed like a good idea at the time. We wanted to do something. So I am going to have to talk about liberals and conservatives a little here because liberals are the ones who are a little more likely to especially feel motivated to do something under the right circumstances. So as much as liberals, who are generally a bit higher in compassion, as well as more psychologically sensitive and open to experimentation, complain about the terrible things done by society in the past, upon looking back at the actual arguments used to advance those actions at the time, it was often those exact same people by type who originally generated those practices. That was the progressivism of its time. Now, this hasn't always been true, of course, but it's been true quite a lot, especially over the last 150 years. Um, Being sensitive creates emotional motivation. Being compassionate, or at least socially oriented, provides moral motivation. And being open to experimentation provides practical motivation. Add in just a dash of competence, get some conscientious people who will make things happen on an administrative level, and you've got a broad social action and experimentation in action. And sometimes that goes well, and sometimes it really doesn't. And that's why, curiously enough, the people who are most likely to complain about the sins of society are also those, in many ways, who were most likely in times past to have produced those sins as innovations. The conservatives are loath to change anything once it's in place and functioning. They're much more averse to change or to experimentation, and they have a weaker tendency, times that's kind of utopian social experimentation that liberals like to engage in. So once something is set up and working, it becomes a kind of default. Conservatives are the ones who will maintain it. But they don't like making bets that aren't fairly sure, and they like to be able to clearly see and measure and control and react to the results of anything they do. So, to pick one tiny random example, liberals are the ones who are most likely to complain about the sort of schools for Native American children that were used as an attempt to Americanize or Anglicize Native cultures by separating them from their cultural and familial influences so they could be directly remediated and improved by the state. Now, that's the sort of thing that is regularly decried by liberals today and held up as an example of the sort of sins that they're trying to point out and act to correct. And that's why you need to listen to them and vote for them so they can take action and prevent these conservative sins from recurring. But in looking at the actual cultural ideas of the time that gave rise to these sorts of practices in the past, as well as their contemporary equivalents, it becomes clear that both then and now, that kind of approach is fundamentally liberal, not conservative. It's not so much the pot calling the kettle black as it is the pot calling tea soup. Um, so before we go too far into this, I think that it's important to note I'm not arguing that liberals, and by liberals, in this I mean left in America. This is the way I'm using the term. It gets confusing these days because the word liberal can actually mean conservative in other countries. And there's a growing divide between leftists and classical liberals. But I'm just using liberals in this sense of the left, or generally more the Democratic Party, more the unconstrained vision, as some people have described it. Anyway, you know what I mean. You're a smart person. So, like I said, I'm not arguing that liberals are worse or are to blame, that everything's their fault. So I'm just trying to parse and get straight the actual genesis of how ideas and practices happen in a society. It's not, ooh, everything was done by that side. No, that's not how things work. It's a dance. It's a dance in which both halves of society take part. And it's just random distribution. I mean, so much of your affiliation has to do with just the sort of person you are, and there is this sort of normal distribution. That's why we end up, for all the crazy things that are happening, ending up somehow half this and half that, because it just seems to be a natural function of the temperament of humans and societies, and what's put into it to kind of make society work. So there isn't an inherent moral advantage to either, because both of them can go equally and catastrophically wrong in their own ways, and both can be wonderfully right in their own ways. They simply employ different strategies. One bets on the tried and the true and standing on principle, and the other bets on adaptation and experimentation and challenge. Now, because our society today, right now, tends to assign so much glamour to innovation and rebellion and challenge and disruption, it becomes necessary to speak back more to that particular cultural bias and remind ourselves of a more balanced and nuanced view that takes into account the value of stability and tested and functioning institutions, and takes into account the real dangers presented both in the past and in the present by attempts to intervene and reinvent and destabilize social contracts, and just especially have the state step in and just fix everything and redesign the world and redesign people. To put it more bluntly, we need to recognize right now the value of what it is that conservatives are conserving, and recognize the dangers that the compassionate intervention and utopian experimentation of the left has and may currently be causing, as has been caused in the past. Now, the call to take action and do something can sound heroic, and no doubt it did and always has in all generations past. But for so much of what we look back on with regret, that was the doing something of that time. And it's only further time and consequences that have provided the clarity of hindsight that allows us today to so easily identify them as mistakes. Good intentions and positive expectations have never been in short supply. It's just much less easy to get a good result than you would think. And if your assumption is just that people of the past were so much worse and so much stupider than yourself, and that's why things will be totally different for you when you do it, if you are given the chance and the power, well, the problem is you're simply ignorant of just how much in common you have with the people of the past. And the best cure for you would be to go and learn from them, to learn and see them and recognize, actually, I see myself in them. They would see themselves in me. Oh my gosh, that means I could make the same sort of mistakes in my own way, in my own time, in my own past. The people of the future may look back on me the same way that I am looking back on those people. I'm not a completely different class of being from all these generations before, or from the generations that will come after me. So that's all for today, and we'll see you next time.